So welcome everyone. This is our tournament tier list. The goal for this is to sort of let people understand what to expect a little bit with the tournament, which civs are going to be good, which civs are going to be bad, what to look out for. We're going to be discussing some strategies based off of things that we've seen. So we're going to start with establishing what the meta is. We're going to talk about what a good civ within that meta is, and then we're going to go alphabetically through the different civilizations from the Aztecs to the Swedes. We'll say what our thoughts are on the civ, why we think they're good or bad, and then we'll finish up with a final ranking. We'll establish that S is like the best, always pick, like they should always be in your games, like you should always want to be playing them first. A are the above average civs, the ones that are good, they're just a little bit weaker than the S tier civs, but they're better than the B tier civs. B is average.
I think that undersells how good I think A should be. I think A should be like very well rounded, and they may have weaknesses in their game, but they're they're always going to be a good pick.
Yeah,
and I would say B is
tiers,
more like a little bit above average, and like decent.
S tier is like the best, like hands down the best. A tier is they're not the best, but they're some of the best. B is like average. There will be a lot of variation within B because we're only using 5 ranks, and so there will be a lot of variation within B. There will be some civs that are better in B than others, but B is generally like they're playable, they're viable, but they're not like good or bad. C tier is they're very niche. They're only like they have very few opportunities for victory, and they need certain things to go right for them in order for them to succeed. And D tier is just like, why would you ever play this civ? We've sort of talked outside of the channel, but also in streams and such, about what the meta has sort of shifted into. Because originally, when we first did our first tier list, we talked about it was very like skirm heavy, and there were a couple ways to victory, but it usually meant like most games usually went to the late game. But things have switched up a little bit. So if you guys want to talk about what your thoughts are on the meta right now.
I definitely think that the civs that have free resources in the terms of factories, banks, torps, etc., those kind of buildings that produce resources, those kind of civs are still extremely strong in the meta.
Mm-hmm.
Especially because a lot of games go on long enough that the resources on the map run dry, and civs that have to transition to expensive plantations and mills are at a disadvantage. So
they're not map dependent.
Exactly, not map dependent.
So
they get free resources that don't require having villagers gathering from something.
Yes. For me, the meta seems to have shifted a little bit in terms of like Zane and I have talked about behind the scenes and maybe even in games, the value of having the hill early for the purposes of like resources expended for the sake of that time early on. And so if you're able to take the hill early on and get that timer down fairly quickly while everybody's either transitioning to like third age and fourth age play styles, or sort of the game is progressing into the late game, if you're able to get that ticker down early, it allows you to just come in at an opportune time when people have been fighting late, expending a lot of resources, and you just come in at the right time when everybody's weak and you can win the game. And that seems to be the meta right now in my eyes.
It could also be argued that because it's easier to get on, like it requires fewer resources expended to get on the hill early, that early time is more valuable. But it's also worth mentioning that the time on the hill early is the easiest to contest. So civs that are strong early in the game can be very easy to contest unless their early game is overwhelmingly strong, and they could, for example, successfully 2v1 opponents at 6, 7, 8 minutes into the game.
Mm-hmm. It's more like 4 to 6 minutes is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, so the actual strength of an early game civ would be more focused on the skill of the player that's piloting them and their own micro than it would be on just, wow, the civ is really strong. So if you can dominate the hill early all the time, and there are one or two civs that come to mind that can really contest it hard early, they may have an advantage in that meta of being able to get on early and guarantee that they're on early, and then it will be easier for them to take and hold the point later. Like they'll expend lots of resources to take it later, but they won't have to hold it for as long.
And that point's especially prevalent in 6-player games as opposed to 4-player games because the timer's shorter.
It's a lot shorter, yeah. Because like once it takes a concerted effort for multiple people, about a minute and a half to kick somebody off the hill.
By the time you hit fortress to early industrial, yes.
Yeah, exactly. So that's usually why that minute 30 mark is extremely important. But anyways, what we want to talk about then is what defines a good civ within that meta that we're discussing here. Because we've talked already a little bit about the idea of non-map dependent resource gathering.
I think I touched on it earlier too about early game dominance in the sense that you are able to overpower multiple opponents or get on the hill so early that you get free time off of there before other players can properly contest. So for example, any civ that can get to age 2 very quickly, any civ that can pump out a significant force for like the colonial age by 5 minutes or 6 minutes. If you can have 3 or 4 hussars or like 10 crossbows or something, it can be very, very difficult for even 2 players to send a little army in to try and contest you. Mm-hmm. And also, I think certain explorers can also be extremely powerful.
Exactly.
And units that also get like dogs or extra units.
Yes.
I think currently there's 4 civs that allow explorers to train units. And of course, you could put your explorer on the hill, age up, take the hill, and then your explorer can train. If it's China, you could do monks. If it's Spain, you could do dogs. If it's Aztecs, you could do Eagle Scouts. So there's about 4 civs that can train units that allow them to hold the hill for like the first minute of the conversation.
Yes. So usually what I've written down, because I've written a few bullet points, I said the first thing was non-map dependent resource gathering, a strong 4 to 6 minutes. Because if you're able to control the hill for those first 4 to 6 minutes, that's huge. Also, then we sort of talked about that idea of that late game push that's overwhelming that people can't really stop, and that's really where revolt strategies and why we enjoy revolt strategies. Not only they're spectacular, but they are very effective at overwhelming people on the hill and just taking it for that little extra bit of time necessary to win the game at the end. So usually civs that revolt the best are going to be good in this meta. Map control is also something that will become crucial when it comes to like being able to control your slice of the hill, not having to fight through other people, being able to have easy access to the hill, especially on maps that are a little bit more cramped, that will require you to potentially have to move around obstacles. Like we've recently been having issues with this in 6-player games on Gran Chaco, where lakes, the positioning of lakes can drastically influence the way that the game is actually played. And then also things like versatility. If somebody's doing something that is a little bit unexpected or something that might require investment to change, like to counter, the ability to easily be able to do that with a civilization is something that is valuable. And then also the big thing is the ability to punish greedy strategies. Because the ability to raid now, the ability to destroy people's economic buildings, should it be necessary, the civilizations that are able to punish people who are not wanting to fight over the hill, is something that cannot be undervalued.
Yeah, I think that the meta for 6-player games will be slightly different from 4-player games, and it's worth at least considering it. We don't have to give it a big weighting, but just thinking about how 4-player games are much more likely to reach that revolt stage than a 6-player game. Because in a 6-player game, it's likely that 2 or 3 players are going to get a real leg up early in the game, and they will be likely to win before the game gets too late. Like I think early on in our tournament, we won't see a whole lot of games that go too late into the industrial age. I think they may be over by the time we hit 15 minutes in a lot of cases. especially as players get accustomed to the meta and get accustomed to different build strategies from what they're accustomed to in free-for-all games or in 1v1s or 2v2.
Yeah, or more casual versions of the game.
And then there's some civs that may have like a really strong early game, but their options for a fast industrial are not great compared to their competition.
I think that we can get started with the civs then. We're going to start with the
Yep.
Aztecs and what your guys' thoughts on the Aztecs are.
So I think we're starting with the worst civ, maybe, potentially.
So what do you think some of their weaknesses are that really make them more challenging to play?
They're an infantry composition. They technically do have units that do the functions of cavalry and of dragoons, but they're still more vulnerable to cannons, for example, than actual cavalry units, because they count as infantry units a lot of the time, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that the Coyote runners and Chimu runners do not count as infantry, so there's no multiplier
For the purposes
against
of that.
But they have fewer hit points than cavalry do, which makes them more vulnerable to just the damage that cannons can do in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm the only person, pretty well, period, within the group of people that we play with that has any sort of success playing the Aztecs when I do play them. So pretty much the biggest comparison usually is the Aztecs and the Inca, because they're very, very similar in their play styles. People will oftentimes say that the Inca are just the better Aztecs, or the Aztecs are the weaker Inca. But there are two advantages that the Aztecs have that the Inca don't. One big and one small one. The big one is the fact that they have much better anti-cav than the Inca do. Because I think that Puma Spearmen are the best spearmen in the game. They're a very, very potent anti-cav unit. And also,
Eagle Runner Knights are the same thing.
Eagle Runner Knights are hands down one of the best Dragoon type units in the game. Just like with all the upgrades that they can get, with how resource efficient they are, with the stats that they have. Like Eagle Runner Knights are, I don't know if they're underrated, but they're extremely strong. And that Eagle Runner Knights are probably the one thing where it's like they're the saving grace of the Aztecs. The other thing is the big button push is Revolt-esque in the late game. It can be overwhelming. I think if I remember correctly, you can have like 300 something pop worth of units. If you throw them at the hill at a good time. So they have potential, but in every other sense, the economy of the Inca is better. The units, generally speaking, are better for the Inca. They're stronger, more potent, are more versatile, and like Chimu runners are just better than Coyote runners. Things like that, where it's just like the Inca are going to have the edge in that situation. But the Aztecs do have that little added bonus. So I put the Aztecs at C tier. I think that they have some form. To be fair, I put nobody in D tier in this tier list. I think that everybody has some level of viability. I just think that the Aztecs are probably at the bottom of C tier.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I every single time I've played with them, I've struggled to, like, they're even cost effectively. I find that their units just don't stack up very well to everybody else. They don't really have an effective skirmisher unit. Their Coyote runners are fairly fragile, and Eagle Runner Knights are kind of countered by the skirmisher heavy comps that we tend to see, and they really don't hold up against artillery. And so even with the resurgence of Cav in our meta, I would still say that the Aztecs, outside of some niche situations, struggle to keep up with everybody else in their military effectiveness. And like you said, their economy, it just doesn't stack up, particularly against the Inca, who obviously are a big comparison.
I actually had some thoughts about what Tristan just said. So he mentioned that he was unimpressed by the skirmisher type units that the Aztecs have. I actually, the Entente and Slingers, I'm actually a fan of those units. They're probably my favorite because they're really cost effective, right?
Yeah, and they're really cheap for what you get.
Another point is you get an infinite 24, I believe, Entente and Slinger card that you can just keep spamming those units at the end of the game, and that's a pretty big deal if you're
How
trying to
would you
hold
compare those to Strelets, though? Because we've already complained, like, we'll get to the Russians, but I don't really know that I think that Strelets, when they get their upgrades, are better.
They're cheaper than Strelets. That's the thing.
Are they?
Yes.
I don't think they're cheaper than 37 food and 10 wood each. I don't think so. I think they're like
They're 40 and 30.
40 and 30. That's significantly more.
Well, one thing I don't ever end up training them because, like I said, you get the infinite 24 Entente and Slinger shipment, and then you can like make other units to complement the composition. So I think that card that gives you 24 Entente and Slingers over and over again is an extremely high value card, right?
Yes.
And the other thing is though that while they may have, regardless of whether we agree that they have strong skirm units, I strongly believe they have the worst anti-artillery in the game. Arrow Knights are extremely what's the word?
Slow.
They're slow. They're awful.
Clunky.
Like they don't even outrange cannons. Like I remember
30. They have 30 range.
Well, is there any cards that increase their range or anything? Because I remember a game where I was playing against a player with heavy cannons on the fort, and they were shooting down, they were destroying my Arrow Knights because they were like the same, almost the same range.
I think don't heavy cannons have like 28 range or something? Like it's much closer, I think.
Yeah.
Regardless, I find that you need to have a big critical mass. Like if you really, given the stacks of heavy cannons that I've seen in our games, you'd need like 20 to 30 Arrow Knights to take out that kind of artillery force. Yeah. And at that point, they're so bad at everything else.
It's one of those situations where it's like, well, why not just play the Inca? Because Horaka are much better. They stack up better against artillery. They deal a lot of damage to artillery. They also have cannons of their own that can potentially counter cannons.
That completely shred heavy cannons. Like
that's true.
The runners just don't do it the same way.
I mean, we'll get to the Inca. But so I'm pretty much willing to say, like, if you guys want to put
I think C tier is probably fair. I can't I think that they, in the right hands, somebody that knows how to play them, somebody that knows how to play to their strengths, they can win games.
Because the thing is,
strong.
We've talked about the fact that they're able to potentially have the hill between 4 and 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Because of the fact that their explorer can also, the Aztecs have a very, very fast age up if they want to age up very, very quickly, and they can hold the hill for that first.
They do get the scouts too. Remember those Eagle Scouts?
Yeah, that's my point. The Eagles, so you can train the Eagle Scouts so you can hold on to that hill very early and get that ticker down, and then you can push with that big button, quote unquote, revolt later in the game. It's expensive, but like you can do it with the right.
They can play to their outs. They have strategies that can lead them to victory. They're not requiring all of the stars to align to win.
And Eagle Runner Knights are really, really good units. But other than that, they're just outclassed by a bunch of different civs. Let's move on.
Maybe let's say you're worried about cavalry. I think just worth mentioning, like if you're worried about cavalry civs, or you see in the hosting room that oh man, we got some strong cav civs. I could see picking the Aztecs if you were thinking of doing the Inca instead, and just like really leaning into those Eagle Runner Knights. Like I think as a meta pick, you could potentially see the Aztecs finding some success because then they can lean into those units that they're strong with.
Yes.
It's a good point. I actually agree with the placement for C tier. So
perfect.
No.
Let's move on to the British here. What are you guys' thoughts on the British?
On paper, they're an amazing civ, but in practice, I don't think that they're more than slightly above average. I think that the manor boom, if you do it really well, it gives them a pretty strong mid game. But first of all, they're not the first player to get on the fort, right? They don't have the strongest 6-minute timing, and in fact, Brits typically don't want to. If you want to get max efficiency out of their eco, you probably want to spam their manor boom ASAP, right?
Yeah, it lengthens your timing push, but your timing push is stronger when you get there.
But
we've talked about it being 10 minutes. The game can be over at 10 minutes if you haven't contested.
Well, they still can make units while they're manor booming, but they won't have enough units to hold the hill or to get any reasonable amount of time on the hill before 10 minutes.
I think that we have to also understand that there's a need to contest the hill. Like contesting and taking the hill are two different things. Like sure, the British can't take the hill early, but they can contest it early for the purposes of making sure that somebody who's doing an earlier strategy doesn't just get like no holds barred. They have no contest on the hill. They're capable of contesting the hill should they help somebody else on the hill.
Mm-hmm. But the other thing is that even though with their massive eco boost from their manor boom, it only serves them really well for a period of time, but then they start to slow down again when the resources on the map run out. Because then they have to invest in wood-heavy buildings when they'd prefer to be making units to contest the point. So,
what I have to say about the British, because I wrote this all down, I think that they're like we always say like the British are the most average civ, even though they're very different than a lot of the other civs that like literally almost all the civs. Like the British have a very unique play style, I think, in terms of the way that they play, but they're extremely map reliant, and so low resource maps really play against the British like hard. Also, when I first started writing this, I was really thinking about revolt strats. I don't think that the British are like, oh my goodness, their revolts are like insane. Like their revolts are average. Their timing push I wrote was awkward, but that can be in their favor because a lot of the time people will want to transition around like 10 minutes from that early game fight to the late game, and that's when the British are pushing, so they can sometimes get a long time on the hill while people are sort of transitioning into that mid to late game economy and military. So that is a potential for them to take the hill early, and then if they decide not to invest too much when people start pushing up against them again, and they're able to hold on to their mass, they can come back late with redcoats and artillery and really wreak havoc, because redcoats are obviously like the best musketeers in the game.
I definitely think late game, they just double down on their musk units because they're so efficient, because there's so many cards for them. And they shout out to the Infinite 2 rocket shipment if you just want to keep spamming rockets. So,
well, that's what I did.
Their eco is pretty good. Like if we're talking, I know that they can get squeezed on maps when the resources run out, but I do find that when they get cooking in the mid game, that they can be a force to be reckoned with in terms of taking and holding the hill. And like we talked about, redcoats are very strong. If you can get your longbows set up and just sitting there, they're some of the best long range skirmisher units in the game. And like their cav is good. Their hussars are Royal Guard hussars. If you get to industrial, like
they do have very strong units late in the game. What I did right here though is to keep in mind the investment that the British player has to make in order to get time on the hill is going to be larger than most other civs because their timing pushes so much later. So anyways, I have them at B tier. I think they're kind of the quintessential B tier civ.
Yep, and that's exactly where I'd put them too.
Yeah, I think that's fair because they have some obvious shortcomings, especially I think with raiding, because they have a bigger villager mass earlier on in the game, and that's going to mean that I can see other players, like a German player, going, "Aha, the British! They're going to have lots of vills for me to kill," and like it's just they're going to be more of a target. I don't know if you'd want to burn down their manor houses. That doesn't seem like a good idea because then they build more and get more vills. But you can still definitely go for their mass,
they're
and they
punishable.
have to kind of spread out.
If they go for that manor boom, they're easily punishable because they're usually going to be eating the map very quickly, and they're going to be prone to raiding later in the game.
Yeah, and I think that definitely, if they were on the fence between A and B, I think that definitely drops
would keep them at B.
Sure.
Yeah, but if they're in the right hands, they can be quite potent. Anyways, let's move on to the Chinese. What are your guys' thoughts on the Chinese?
Chinese, for the longest time, I was considering them to be an S tier civ, and they might still be. To be fair, we haven't seen too many China mains apart from Chillin playing as China. China has an extremely powerful fortress and industrial age. They just get to keep spamming out units. We know this. They also do get to, they have a really tanky explorer that can train monks. So like they have that option of taking the hill early and booming behind it, or like teching to age 4, coming out with flying arrows or old hand reforms. They have many options, and their unit composition is always balanced.
What about you, Tristan? What do you think?
We have talked about them just always seeming to come back with a new army when you blow up their army. And I'm honestly not entirely sure how that works for them, but they just have this kind of unending mass of solid units in a well-balanced army. Like every game that we have ever had China in, they always have a very balanced force that's very difficult to just outright counter. It's not like they're just massing skirms and artillery, or they're going muscats or something where you're like, yeah, okay, I know exactly what they're doing. They always come at you with like 4 or 5 different kinds of units.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this might surprise you guys because we originally had China at S tier in our previous tier list, but I think that they've been a little bit exposed in terms of the meta shift. They're quite weak early on in the game, and so they can't really contest the hill very effectively, especially since they want to get into that sweet spot of H3 and 4 as fast as possible. And they can be punished pretty hard by raiding. Like it's difficult. I've generally found if a Chinese player is under pressure for them to get up to H3 and 4, like you can really delay a Chinese player's late game if you pressure them heavily. And so I think that it's one of those situations where they're going to have to invest a lot of resources later in the game to make minimal gains. And I think that when you have 6 players, if you have 6 players fighting over the hill on a regular interval, like on a regular basis, it weakens the Chinese. Like I don't really think that their eco is that strong. I really don't think that if they're contested early on in the game, that they're actually going to be able to hold up to a lot of the other civs that are stronger, that are not as map reliant, and can produce strong units over a long period of time throughout the game.
To be fair, China is not one of the most map-reliant civs. They get more free units than any other civ in the game.
Yes, they get more free units.
I did the math on their units too, and once you start getting unit upgrades, they go toe-to-toe with the European equivalents, and they train in batches.
Mm-hmm.
Sure, yes. I still don't think that they are really one of the top-tier civs anymore.
I still think that they're A tier.
Yeah, I agree.
So I wrote it down at C tier, but as we sort of talked about, I think that it's pretty probably healthy to have them at B tier. I think that a British player, I would prefer to be playing the British over the Chinese in a King of the Hill match.
Is that a personal preference?
Yes, it is a personal preference because obviously I'm more comfortable with the British. But when it comes to just in terms of they're in this situation where they're going to have to invest a lot of resources late game into getting time on the hill when you're going to have a lot of people contesting you on it. And people are generally not as afraid of the Chinese as they are of, let's say, like a French army on the hill or an Ottoman army on the hill. Like those are scary. While, a Chinese army, the perception obviously is you got a bunch of weaker troops on the hill.
And I still think that the reality is that they're going to have a big army, they're going to have a high population, and like you might not be afraid of them, but they'll keep coming. Like I don't think we've ever had a game where the Chinese player has been completely sidelined.
Mm-hmm. True, raiding, but I don't think that we've had
be a problem for them.
We've had a lot of Chinese players in our games, and very few times do they they don't really win that often.
But that's a skill thing. I think that's honestly a skill and familiarity thing over the civ just not being strong.
Exactly. And the other thing is you're forgetting that China is one of those 4 civs that can take the hill first because they can train monks.
True.
There's even a wonder that makes their monks OP that can go toe-to-toe with any other Age 2 unit. So if China wanted
just early Age 2 unit,
Yeah, we're talking about getting those first 2 minutes off the hill so that later in they come in with an Age 3 mass that you just can't kill in time because it's huge. China has the largest army by 12 minutes of any civ.
I think if we were to see China in skilled hands, I think we would find them to be a lot more scary than those of us that don't really play them very much or don't play them very well.
Okay, so how would you feel? Would you prefer to take Germany or China in a King of the Hill game?
If there's raiding, I would prefer to face China. But if there's no raiding,
we're talking about in terms of this tournament, which raiding is allowed. I would much prefer to take be the Germans. In that situation.
But Germans are way more map dependent than China, for example.
And
way
the
more.
Germans are also the aggressor in that case. They're the ones that are expected to be initiating, so that could just be a playstyle preference. Some people just prefer to, defend themselves or wall up and they want to take that more conservative style rather than being the one that's raiding. And you just happen to be the kind of player that enjoys the aggressive strategy that the Germans would offer.
Sure, but also like in terms of strength of unit, like the strength of the age 3, age 4 army of the Germans is much higher, I think, than the Chinese. However, I don't want to argue too much about it because I will trust your guys' opinion on it. It might just be I don't like the Chinese, and so I will put them at A tier because I think that it's fair to put them at, like, I don't think that, like, there's obviously an argument to be made for them in A tier. I just think that
I would definitely put them above Brits, because like if we say Brits is the quintessential B tier, I think China's better than Brits personally.
We'll be able to adapt some of this after the tournament. I'm sure we'll see some China at some point during the tournament, maybe in some particularly skilled hands, and it'll be easier to evaluate them after that.
Mm-hmm. So let's move on to the next civ, the Dutch. What do you guys think of the Dutch?
I think the Dutch are that civ that, like we were talking about, that is the least map dependent. No, they're, first of all, they're a slow civ. They're one of the last civs to be able to contest the point, and that's because their age 2 unit composition is it's difficult because they don't have musks, they don't have all around units. Mm-hmm. So in age 2 they're either trying to do skirms or Huss, and that means that they don't want to stay H2 because they cannot have a balanced composition, right? They would have to make like pikes to complement skirms, and that can be a strong composition, but it's not a game-winning composition.
Well, so also you're having to invest in 3 resources in H2, and usually you want to invest in 2 resources.
You want to make banks because you want to be set up for the late game.
Yeah, and so you don't want to be investing in wood, right?
Mm-hmm. And that's the other thing is that Dutch wants to make their banks. They don't want to be making units early. But once it makes it to the mid game, they have one of the strongest economies, and the economy doesn't. They're less map dependent, right?
They're probably one of the least map dependent civs in the game.
And their resources will keep pumping out even while everyone's transitioning to mills and plantations. They'll be able to be spamming anything they want. Gold heavy compositions, if they want. They could go heavy on the cannons. They could just double down on their skirm goon cards. And then they have like the eco revolt, South Africa, like that's kind of been largely unexplored, but extremely.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the Dutch have the most fun revolts out of all of them. Like, I love playing the Dutch just for the purposes of getting to the late game and revolting as them. Because, as you know, my favorite revolt is the Indonesia revolt. But as you said, you got the South Africa revolt, and I think that there are like 2 more revolts that are pretty fun for them as well.
I think if we're talking the late game, I think that the Dutch you could argue for the Dutch having the strongest late game out of all of the civs in King of the Hill, just because their economic potential, especially as the resources run out, is so high. They have really potent revolts, and I've never seen one of our games go past like 26, 27 minutes. And if you ask me, they're at the peak of their power then. They can get tons of artillery. They've got really strong revolt options. They've got excellent skirmishers. You know, like, they can basically put together whatever kind of composition they want if the game goes on long enough.
However, I think that they are weaker to cavalry due to the fact that Reuters really aren't that great.
You also don't like halberdiers, and I like halberdiers.
What did you say, Zane?
I was saying Reuters aren't the best goon units, but they do the job. They're cheap, and the Dutch economy has no problems making
spamming
more.
Them. Yeah. I mean, I have them between A and S tier, but I think that in this specific meta where people are trying to chip off as much time early on as possible for an overwhelming push later in the game, I think that they are weaker. This is probably one of the weakest states that they're in, unless you have like a full-on, you want to take the hill early and just hold on to it type meta. Like, I think that the Dutch are going to be good in almost any type of game like this. But they're very difficult. Like, I don't know if you saw that one game where it was a 1v1. It was on the ESOC channel, ESOC YouTube channel, where this dude was literally like single-handedly fighting against the Lakota, who are extremely heavy on the pressure in the early game, and they were just able to hold them off and like win the game with 70 pop worth of houses. As the Dutch, just because like he was able to turtle so effectively. Like, the Dutch are extremely hard to punish in the early game, and their late game is going to show up at some point.
They're harder to raid because banks are so tanky that like you're not going to stick around long enough to burn down all the banks.
Exactly. They're really hard to punish early. So that's why I have them. I have them between A and S tier because I think that there are civs that are better than them, and we'll get to those. But I'm fine if you guys want to put them in S, but I think that I would be more comfortable putting them in A.
What do you think, Tristan?
I think you could probably stick them in A right now, given the way that the meta looks, given their early game weakness, and I don't think that they could overwhelmingly take and hold the point for long enough later in the game without getting on early. Like I just don't see them taking it and successfully holding it for like 5 minutes straight in the industrial age when they finally get there and they get on the point. And I think that they also risk just losing outright early because they struggle to provide adequate contest to somebody that's going for an earlier strategy. Like I could see a French player that's able to successfully take the point and beat everybody off of it, and like 12 minutes or 13 minutes into the game they win, and the Dutch player just hasn't truly come online yet in order to really fight that.
Right. I agree with the A tier placement. Those are some really good points.
All right, let's move on to the French. I mean, Zane, we'll let you sort of start with this, obviously, because you're the resident
French is my
player.
favorite civ. So France is one of the most versatile civs in the game.
Mm-hmm.
They have every unit composition, and they have some of the strongest skirms. So they got Royal Guard skirms, and they have really tanky heavy cav. Granted, my experience with the French is your economy in a King of the Hill game typically won't allow you to do whatever you want. You do have to double down on whatever strat you're doing. So so if you're going queer series, you're not also going to be able to do a bunch of other unit compositions, right? You might do skirm, queer, you might do musk heavy cannon. You could do whatever you want, but you can't do everything.
Yeah, you have to invest in that one specifically.
Mm-hmm. So France has one of the strongest 10-minute timings in from my experience.
Yeah.
So if they wanted to go for an aggressive push on the hill, they're one of the civs that I think could, 1v2 or like hold the hill in the early game, right? They don't have like they're not going to be the first on the hill, right? Because they can't train units from their explorer. But what they can do is they could do a strong musk husk timing at about 7 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
and very few civs are going to be able to contest that 7 to 10 minute army, right? And then France could come. And then if they get kicked off the hill, they just age up and come back with an even scarier composition.
Yeah,
That's
pretty much. The later the game goes, the scarier the French can get very scary later in the game. Also, I think that they're the only civ that can make the Canadian revolt viable, and the fact that they pretty much can have like very potent coureurs de bois fighting over the hill at the very end for that just like last ditch effort makes them very scary when like they're
what is it like they have a 30 or 40% range resist and 380 hit points along with a very solid ranged attack. Like unless you send cav at them, that's pretty scary. They can pack a big punch when you have like 60 of them.
That moment when they're tankier than your actual military units.
Yeah, exactly. And if you like plan on investing in that for the late game, like if you have a strategy based around it, like I'd like to see somebody try and do that, but
it doesn't ruin your economy like most revolts do. You can revolt and keep playing as if nothing has happened. They can send Highlanders from their home city after they revolt, and obviously those are very powerful muskets, and it's a pretty good complement if you're worried about cav. Because I definitely would personally not want to be running my heavy cav into 30 Highlanders.
Yeah, and I think that the French fit the best into this specific meta. That idea of take the hill fairly early, hold on to it with a cheaper investment for those valuable early minutes, and then just push late game with an overwhelming force. And the French need to be worked on together to defeat them. Unless you're like actively wanting to pursue them, hold them up in their base, things like that. But the thing is, they can raid, like they can just retreat, raid with whatever cavalry that they have, and age up. Like they can comfortably do that, and then they can still have an impact on the map even when they're not on the hill. So I have them at probably high A tier. Like, I would prefer the French over the Chinese. I prefer the French in certain situations over the Dutch, as we sort of talked about when we were talking about the Dutch. But I think that there are still some civs, as we're going to be coming up to them, that are better than the French. Because we've sort of talked about the French. The biggest issue with the French is they're a jack of all trades, master of none. But so, like, in certain situations, some civs are going to be better than others. But I think that this is sort of like where the French are at their best. And, like, I would not be surprised seeing a lot of people just deciding to play the French. And, like, I would always be happy playing the French if I was playing in a tournament setting.
Mm-hmm. I agree with that too. France is an amazing civ, but I can't think of anything that they're master of that they're better than any other civ at.
Yeah,
I guess they're like their heavy cav, like their cuirassiers, are probably like the best trainable, best trainable unit that you can get. Like the trainable cav. I mean, you can't train Spahi, you can train cuirassiers.
Yeah, I mean Spahi are better, but yeah, cuirassiers are nuts.
And so I think if you sit there on the point and you see like 30 or 40 like gendarmes in the industrial age, you're gonna pee your pants. Like you're gonna get off the hill.
Yeah, so let's move on to the Germans, because we got a lot to get through here, and we've got a little over an hour left before we're gonna have to move on.
Good.
Yeah, so let's work on the Germans here. What do you guys' thoughts on the Germans?
I have some interesting thoughts on the Germans. I think first of all, we placed them rather low on our last tier list, and I take most of that back now. Germans, for one, they get the Uhlans.
The free Uhlans, yeah.
The free Uhlans, which they come with your first shipment. So like if you're just trying to like get some a minute off the hill or something early on, like you just send your Uhlans to the fort and they'll kill the explorers or whatever on the fort.
Yep.
They have such high attack that they're one of the best, like next to like Lakota in terms of raiding potential.
Yep.
Because you get them for free. You don't have to invest in your cavalry to raid, right?
Yeah, you could still be focusing on economy, and you're still getting cavalry units.
Mm-hmm. And Uhlans kill Vils like twice as fast as Hussars. So
yeah.
So there's that, and then there's the fact that they have 3 settler wagon shipment is considered by most pro players to be the most efficient age 2 shipment in the game, with good reason. That's 6 villagers plus 300 resources worth of cavalry.
Yep.
So that's essentially 1,000 resource shipment or 950 resource shipment in H2.
Like, it's nuts.
And they're just generally a decent civ. Like their only weakness, I think, is their lack of heavy infantry, muskie unit.
And also, you've been experimenting a lot with crossbow pike strats. And that allows the Germans, if they really want to invest in H2, like I don't think that the Germans want to invest in H2, but they can apply a lot of pressure.
Can.
Pardon?
They certainly can. They certainly can fight in H2 effectively and get time off the hill.
And they can if they want to push on the hill, if they see that there's an opportunity for that, they can go into that. And then I think that, like, personally, I believe that the German H3 is the strongest. Like their H3 army is frightening. Especially with all their shipments. Like, I think that they have some of the best H3 shipments. I mean, there's an argument that China has equally, if not better. But I still...
Germany does get it faster.
Pardon?
Germany does do the H3 a little faster than China.
Yeah. And also, like, they can come out with a much larger economy with that. Because I always think back to in the base game where Azamp was playing the Germans, and he did sort of like a semi-FF, like it was an eco-FF, semi-FF, and he just went for the 3 settler wagons, then 2 settler wagons, and then, like, no resource shipments at all, and just, like, naked aged up to age 3, and it was nuts. Like, he just had this insane eco, and he could do whatever the heck he wanted. But
we do got to talk about weaknesses, though, and that would be their gold heavy composition, and the fact that gold is one of the easiest exhaustible resources on the map. Yeah. Right. And once Germany runs out of gold, if they're not in age 4, if they don't have factories, if they haven't invested in other, if they blow their load too early and lose their gold heavy composition, they struggle to ever have a meaningful impact for the rest of the game.
Yeah, they have to hold on to their troops are more valuable. Like, they don't want to trade, pretty much.
They don't want equal trades. Never.
Yeah, they don't want
Germany
equal
never wants
trades.
equal trades.
They want only favorable trades.
Yeah, they've always struck me as kind of a glass cannon civ, I guess you could describe them as, in the sense that they want to hold on to their units, they want to make the best use of their resources and of their coin to make sure that they're effective for as long as possible.
Yeah. So, long story short, where do we want to put them? I put them at B tier because I think that we had them. I think at like D or C tier, but I think that they're
at C last time.
Yeah, I think that they're probably like I could take the British, I could take the Germans. I'd be happy with it, but like obviously there are other civs that I'd much prefer to be playing than the
Germans still kind of feel a bit pigeonholed. There's certain things they have to do, and if they're not taking advantage of their Uhlans to raid, like, what are you even playing the civ for at that point?
But that's why you play the civ, because you want to raid, you want to punish other people, and take favorable trades.
They're probably good in a healthy ecosystem too, because they exist to punish a lot of those greedy strategies that just want to get late.
Yeah.
The other thing is, just one small detail is they don't have a 2 Falk shipment, so they can't like they do have less options when it comes to like a Fortress Age timing. Like if you're up against you would have to send 8 skirms, which can sometimes be less effective than 2 Falks against
2 Falks can counter skirms. That's the thing.
Right.
And your 8 Falks or your 8 skirms don't counter 2 Falks the other way. If
that's the thing. You're 100% right, because like that 2 Falk shipment can turn like a meh army into like a scary army instantly.
Right.
So, anyways, let's move on because we've got about a little over an hour left, and we're not even halfway finished here. So, Haudenosaunee.
I'm gonna let Tristan start this. I'll be right back.
Yeah,
probably good because I guess have the most experience with them.
Yeah, you're also the one that likes them the most. Yes,
and I've had some success. I have won games with them, and you guys haven't, and nobody else has.
Yeah,
they're difficult to quantify because they don't seem conventionally strong. Their economy is not really all that impressive. A lot of their units, you're kind of like, Iena, they're not that scary, and they often get outranged by enemy skirmishers. But what I have found in particular, and I have gone on and on about this, is that they have a couple units that are extremely potent in the right situation.
Yeah, and they're like they got unique units that actually kind of favor the game mode.
Yeah, like if you look at mantlets, for example,
yes.
This is my favorite unit, or probably already boring you to death about it, just because you've heard me say it a lot, but they have a huge range resist, a huge HP pool, and while they don't do a whole lot of damage, they're damage sponges. So the enemy is forced to attack your mantlets while you have tomahawks to protect them, or you have skirmishers of your own behind. You've got the forest prowlers, which I don't think I've seen anybody take advantage of their stealth, but I could see that
you can't.
Positioning.
That's the problem. You can't really take it because
not
there's no
on
stealth
the hill,
on the hill
but you could flank with them. Like there are things that you could do. But the mantlets in particular, if you don't run cav at them and break them that way, they're devastating because you waste so many shots as ranged units on them, and they can stop cannons. Like just the damage sponge ability that they have allows the Haudenosaunee army to last longer and go further. Yeah. And I think that their units are underrated. So while their economic power might not be up there, I think that they have tools that allow them to succeed in the right situation.
Yeah, so I have them, like I say that they're competitive, fairly versatile, but I always feel like they're missing something. Like, I always feel like I'm competing when I'm playing the Haudenosaunee, but I always feel like, man, if only I had like this, or if only I had like that, if only like my economy was a little bit stronger, if only I had just like a better... Go ahead.
The worst, I think they have the least viable industrial age.
I mean, they only get their cannons in the Industrial Age.
I disagree. I think that their Fortress Age is way weaker, and their Industrial Age is very strong.
Yeah,
especially once they send good cards.
I'd much prefer to be the Haudenosaunee in H4 than in H3.
And remember that their light cannons have like 30 range or something. They also have like Culverin range, and so you can destroy enemy artillery very easily.
Like, I think the Tomahawks are pretty good. I think that Iena are weak. Like, I don't think I'd ever really want to actively get Iena. I like Forest Prowlers. I feel like they're outclassed by similar type units, though. And I like their light cannons. I like the mantlets. I don't really like the Kenya Horsemen. I don't really care for the musket riders either. Like, their cavalry is kind of lacking, but it's there. Like, it's serviceable.
I like the Horsemen, actually, and it's partly because they cost wood instead of gold, so the gold doesn't exhaust as much.
Yeah, but wood's a slow-gathering resource, and that's really the issue.
They're also fast. Their cavalry is also quite fast, and it allows them to be very maneuverable, and it makes them effective at raiding. So, I don't know. Like, personally, I like them. I think that they're better than we've rated them in the past, but, you know, me liking them, I still really can't put them any higher than B tier, like the bottom of B tier. But I don't know that, like, I don't think they're Aztec level. I think they're better than that. Like, I think that they have clear strengths that you can leverage to a victory. They have a strong early game. They can age up very quickly. And while they may be lacking in some areas, I still think that they can be quite competitive in the right hands.
Yeah,
especially with their unique units.
I think it's fair to put the Haudenosaunee in B tier. I think they're probably at the bottom of B tier, but they're viable. For sure.
I'll agree with B tier.
Okay, next up is the Inca, from which I will start because I have come to the realization we haven't been able to see within the games that we play, because we usually don't allow writing within our games, but for the sake of the tournament, we have to realize that the Inca are allowed to raid. And so for that reason, I think that the Inca thrive the most in the meta established within this. Granted, like the French, as Zane sort of said, you have to invest in a specific strategy as the Inca. Like, yes, they are versatile. They can have one of, if not the strongest economies in the game if they want to really invest in it. They can have one of the strongest early games if they invest in it. But all of those investments are at the detriment to later stages or other stages of the game. Like, for instance, I found when we were playing last night, the Inca will really struggle in the late game if they're trying to pressure early. And I think that their early pressure is not really that as potent as other rush civs. Their real strength is in their rating. However, they're super balanced. I think that they have the best quote-unquote revolt in the game in the Tupac Rebellion. Like, that is the quintessential, like, I have a minute and a half left on the hill. Let me transform my slightly weaker units into guard European units and push the hill to win. And like that
and
is,
like the hype video where you had the 20 cannons that showed up.
I mean, that was a bad idea. That was just a bad idea.
It was hilarious, however.
It was it was a good meme, but like, they have access to cannons. Chimu runners are insane. Chimu runners are definitely the highlight. I think that jungle bowmen are the majority of the damage, though, and jungle bowmen are like the backbone.
After having played the Inca, and let the game go on long enough and really get a feel for them, they are quite strong.
Oh, so I think that I know that Zane is usually not that big of a fan of the Inca, but you look at like what they're capable of doing. If they're able to play, if they pick the right strategy for the game, they are going to be a force to be reckoned with, regardless of how the game plays out. So, like, for instance, if the game requires early game fighting, the Inca can do that with the best of the civs. If it requires sort of a late game boom, the Inca can do that with the best. But the real key to success when it comes to the Inca, and part of the reason why I had mentioned map control with forts, strongholds, castles, and walls, is because the stronghold is the single most valuable resource to the Inca on King of the Hill. Because you can choose when you mitigate, like you can mitigate as few losses as possible, and people can't chase your army, because the moment they start chasing your army, you get a much more valuable trade, because you can pop units out on the opposite side of the fort, of the stronghold. You can the stronghold obviously does a lot of damage, and it's just like you control the map a lot more effectively with the stronghold, and that's really what puts the Inca over every other civ around them. Now, I'm not saying that they're the best civ, but they are probably an easy S tier.
Wait, tell the viewers more about what the stronghold can do, because I'm sure some of them don't even know that you can garrison.
So yeah, you can garrison your military units in the stronghold. I think you can even garrison artillery in the stronghold if I remember correctly. I might be wrong about that. But you can garrison your units in the stronghold, and so because you can garrison them in there, if enemies decide to attack you, you just put your units in the stronghold, and they have a huge HP pool that they have to destroy before they can actually get to your military units. In which time, you can pop your military out and harass the enemy while they're trying to take out your stronghold. So stronghold.
I also want to emphasize, it's not totally related to the stronghold, but I really, really want to emphasize that the Inca also are meta breakers, in the sense that for the longest time, and even in our current meta, skirmishers are very important. Like, they're very powerful, and lots and lots of cannons and artillery show up all the time. And Chima runners,
Go burr.
they it's disgusting. It's gross to see how they in mass, and how easily mass produced they are, that they can just completely shred those armies.
Hold up, Valerian. What are you doing?
What?
You're jumping the gun here.
No, I'm putting them, like, we can obviously dispute, like, what do you dispute about the Inca here in S tier?
Okay, good question. I know you have a lot more experience with Inca than me, so, and I am sure I have not spent enough time to know the full extent of their viability.
Mm-hmm.
However, like you were saying, first of all, they don't have the strongest, like, early game, as in they can be beat by other civs who have a stronger early game.
Yep.
I would almost say that I would almost say that they're like France at best, in that they're not the master of anything. They might be closer to the masters of, like, later game, like, strength, right? And they do have a lot of really cool things, like you said, with the stronghold and the 2-pack revolt.
Yep.
But S tier.
Okay, here's the thing that the Inca have that the French don't. The Inca are not as map dependent as the French are in terms of their economy due to cancha houses. The stronghold is something that they have access to that literally no other civ does, and that is a huge benefit when it comes to King of the Hill. They have a much more oppressive capability when it comes to raiding with Chima runners due to the fact that they are not snareable, and so they can just run away and escape. And
their army is also pretty mobile in general.
Yes, because a lot of their cards that they send are to encourage mobility. And the fact that you can make, because usually in almost every single one of my games, Chima runners, I send the card for 1,000 gold, which I cheapen to make them able to snare enemies, which pretty much just makes them better coyote runners, like just better in every way. And they have the 20% range resist when you send the big button card.
The big button card.
Yeah, the big button card. But so, like, they have like the French, they're able to do kind of a little bit of everything, but unlike the French, they're actually better than every other civ at certain things. For instance, being oppressively, like, punishing people and controlling the map. And I think that they're probably... No, I don't think that they're more... I think they're as versatile as the French are. French might have a little bit more versatility. Like, their biggest weakness is cavalry. But even cavalry can be countered if you're microing properly. Because my issue has always been micro when I'm playing with them.
What about, like, dragoon-style units, like ranged cav?
Ranged cav
obviously,
will
heavy
get...
cav, you can get the plume spearmen.
Ranged cav will get shredded by Chima runners.
You're right.
Ranged cav do nothing against Inca because they don't ranged cav don't have a multiplier against shock infantry. It's a brand new unit type.
Yeah.
It's kind of an
it was
oversight
light infantry
before.
before.
My opinion, that
No. It was light infantry before, and they just changed the name to shock infantry because light infantry didn't make sense.
Yeah, and so
I think it's an oversight that goons don't counter Chima runners because because there's no other real natural counter to that's mobile as achievement runners.
But this is why, Zane, I have the Inca in S tier, because they're better than the French at certain things, and they're just as versatile as the French.
Okay.
So that's why I have them in S tier.
I do also want to mention too that like you may be a best case scenario for them, which I guess is fine for balance.
No, I don't think I am.
That's the tournament.
That's the thing. I don't think
it's
I am.
It's possible that people in the tournament will also play them very well, but we have also not seen anybody other than you that's been successful with them in that degree.
I don't think we've seen many people play them.
That's true.
So, anyways,
I won't argue with you about S tier for now, but it's definitely on my radar.
I'll let it be. That's
okay.
That works for me.
Because, like, understand, you'll see that I am a little bit more affirmative of the civs that you guys like as well, as I've thought about them, and I've seen you guys play them at high levels. Because, for instance, we're going into the next I civ, which is India. So we'll have Tristan talk about India and his thoughts on it. I'm going to grab another water bottle while you're doing that.
No problem.
I talked about India in the last tier list and sung their praises in a lot of different ways. It's difficult to evaluate them because they're very different. They're almost like, like China and Japan, and that they're very different. They're villagers, they require wood, and they have a lot of like wood gathering help. They have wood trickles. Every single shipment that they send also sends villagers, which also helps to boost their economy. And so by the time they reach the mid to late game, they almost always have a very strong economy. They've got the Agra Fort, which, while not a powerful fort initially, is still a very good zoning tool that gives you the ability to train troops without a barracks and gives you the ability to control areas of the map. We've already seen how effective the ceasefire can be. And I've talked at length about some of their units. The Gurkhas basically get arsenal upgrades if you send a card. Like they get a 3 times multiplier against heavy infantry. I think they have slightly less range than skirms, but like I have always found them to be very effective. Sepoys with upgrades are very, very close to redcoats. Mm-hmm. They get elephants. Mahouts are some of the best dragoon units in the game. Not Mahouts.
What do you think about, first off, India's early game, like the H2 pressure, get some time on the fort? How viable is that early game pressure?
Their 2 explorers are not particularly powerful.
They are against Skirp type units.
Yes, but I find that they're not like the biggest annoyance is their stomp. If you got your units clumped up and you've got two of your explorers on it, they'll repeatedly stomp your units, and that can slow them down.
Yes.
I haven't really tried to rush with them too much.
Yes,
but I think.
Go ahead. Actually, I'll let you finish your.
I just want to finish. Yeah, like the Agra Fort gives them a certain amount of zone control, and you can have that overlapping heavily with the fort. And so if they commit to early pressure, I think that they can at least contest. I don't want to overhype them in the sense that I don't really know how effectively they can really take it. I don't know how effectively they would be able to survive early pressure on their forts. But I think I would be careful to understate their impact, especially if they go for Agra Fort first, which I guess there's not really a reason not to, just because of the zone of control it offers and the fact that you can train units from it.
Yes. So for me, what I have for the Indians is they're probably the best map control civ, especially early on in the game, due to the fact that you can park the Agra Fort next to the hill early on, throw some walls up, and it's almost impossible to take them off the hill. Because all they have to do is just retreat a little bit behind the Agra Fort, and while the Agra Fort doesn't do a lot of damage, it produces units, it receives shipments, and you don't want to fight underneath that.
It's like having another unit. Honestly, it's like having another sepoy in the sense that it does like 25 damage early on. Like it is like having an extra unit that just never dies.
And so if they want to invest any bit of they probably have the fewest resources necessary to invest in taking the hill early, and it's very hard to take them off the hill once they're on the hill. And so because of that, I think that the Indians are probably one of, if not the best, early game civs when it comes to getting that valuable early time. And then obviously, as we know, the ceasefire literally gives free time on the hill, which is insane, especially at the end of the game when those minutes are extremely expensive, and when you can just get them for free,
I think if it was well optimized, you could probably do 2 ceasefires during a King of the Hill game.
They're 19 seconds each. So if you can get 2 of them, that's 38 free seconds that you get on the hill.
Which is huge. Most people have to expend so many resources for 38 seconds on the hill.
And that's my point. That's why I think that the Indians are the most efficient when they're on the hill. Not only because of that, but also because they have usually very specialized units, but those specialized units are usually the best at doing that specialty than any other civ. So like if they need anti-cav, they can get very potent anti-cav. If they need anti-infantry, they can get very potent anti-infantry. If they need anti-heavy infantry, Gurkhas are really, really good. So like they can do everything.
I think Howdas are better than war wagons.
I think that Howdas are
already considered to be very, very good anti-cav.
You know, an unexplored strat is making Howdas and healing them when they're not fighting, because they're so tanky that like you would get so much value out of keeping them at full HP when they're not in the fight.
You can also have Mahouts with like almost 2,000 hit points.
Yeah.
Which is just gross, because I've sent them in before. I've had like 2 Mahouts or something, like not even very many. You send them in and they're just a meat shield. They're kind of like the mantlets in the sense that they take a lot of investment to kill, and during that time your Gurkhas and your Sepoys and your other units can burst down the enemy units.
And
in
the
addition,
have AoE.
their Soars may not be the best cav units, but they are also very fast. I think they have 7.25 movement.
Yeah.
And they also beat that light infantry, like the skirmisher units. And so you can hit and run with them like the best of them.
And so pretty much for that reason, like the Indians are the quintessential Koth Civ, I think. And that's why I have them at S tier.
I'm glad I have converted you guys to the Indians finally.
Like we can even admit Tristan is not the strongest player in our group, but the fact that he is a force when he's playing as India proves that India is such a strong civ that even players who are lower on the rung are able to compete when they're playing as India.
Yeah, provided you know how to play to their strengths and you know how to play to the fact that they operate differently. They collect wood, they have fewer villagers, they get villager shipments, they have, wonders that need to be built. There's a lot of optimization that needs to be done there. And, you don't even have to play particularly optimally. And I should also mention that they have a lot of flexibility.
Yeah.
They do have a revolt.
And they're less map dependent because of their wood fills.
Yep.
Yeah, they have a revolt that allows them to turn all their villagers into sepoys. It's a soft revolt because it doesn't give you any extra perks.
Probably not a good revolt, to be fair.
But if you need, like, say you want a last-minute push and you're like, I just need to get a little bit more time, instead of just sending your vills on, you can send sepoys on instead.
Yeah, you actually put something... I mean, like, it's a thing that you can do. I think
it's
that India...
Thing that you can do.
So how I'm also doing this right now is further left you are on your tier, the better you are. So right now I have...
Did we even talk about the consulate?
Yeah.
We didn't even talk about the consulate. They've got extra benefits.
Long story short, India OP, please nerf in King of the Hill. Pretty much just to explain to everybody as well, if you're further left on your tier, that means that you're better than so on and so forth. So next up is Japan. Who wants to take Japan? Actually, Zane, yeah, because you've changed a little bit when it comes to Japan. You put them personally at S tier, and so I was.
I don't know. I didn't play Japan enough. I think by the time we did the first tier list, and I've played them a lot more since, and realized that they're like Dutch in the sense that they have an economy that just keeps going, that isn't map dependent, but they're able to make units far sooner. They have a far stronger H2 composition, and they're one of the only civs that can go Imperial, by like 20 minutes and
it's
have
nuts.
the biggest army on the map.
I've done it. I've seen other people do it, but like I've done it, no joke, actually hit the Imperial upgrade button and gotten to that age in a game that went late.
Yes.
It's doable.
So for me, I say that when Japan gets out pressured by the likes of like the British, that shows that their late game is like severely lacking. And so for that reason, I don't believe that they can be S tier, just because I'm like, this is a game mode where you want to be taking the hill early, and the the Japanese just really can't contest the hill early. Like, they have to get an economic base. They have to get their shrine pop up. They have to set up their economy to a certain degree before they can really be a force on the map. But when
They're
they
like
get...
Brits, but better, I think.
Pardon?
They're like Brits, but better.
Yes. Yes. And the reason for that is the fact that they are not map dependent due to the shrine boom. And...
harder to raid due to the shrine boom, and
also harder to raid, and you have to kill their shrines, or else they're going to be a force later in the game, and a major force later in the game. So for that reason, like, they're definitely better than the British, but I think that you compare them to civilizations like the Inca and the Indians, and I'm like, well, you kind of know what you're getting. However, like, I sort of explained the Japanese when I wrote this down here. They're kind of like a ticking time bomb that needs to be stopped, or else they're just going to out-trade. Like, they're just going to be able to out-trade you because of their economy later in the game. They can produce units.
But their units later in the game are gross too. Like, you can get Ashigaru if you get even to like late industrial that are like right on toe-to-toe with muskets or like redcoat muskets or better. They get all those daimios that are super tanky and that buff the attack
Tokugawa
of your units
is
and the
literally
HP.
anti-artillery. Like, one unit just kills all the enemy artillery with these. Just like
He like one-shots everything.
Yeah. He's
Yumis are really good. Like, for skirmisher units, they're very strong.
Shout out to Yabusame who take out cannons in like 2 volleys.
Yeah, but
and
some
samurai
archers
are some of the best heavy infantry in the game. Like, sure, you guys might not like heavy infantry, and they're very expensive, but if you can put them to good use, they're devastating.
Oh, yeah.
They're very destructive.
Yeah. So, like, Japan, their biggest weakness is their lack of potent artillery. Flaming arrows are meh. Like,
but you can train them from your daimyo. You can
Yes.
drop them in the middle of battle, and if someone's not expecting that, you could just like take out, like, if someone has a bunch of heavy cannons on the fort and you just pop a bunch of flaming arrows, you could pick them out instantly.
so yeah, I have them at a solid A tier. I think that they're not S tier, up there with the. I think they're probably one of the better A tier civs.
I do A+ tier,
Yeah. Would you have them above or below the French?
above France.
Okay, above France.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
So they're probably going to be the best A tier civ. Next up is the Lakota. Who has the most experience? I think that we all kind of have played the Lakota at some point.
Yes.
I sort of look at the Lakota. They're similar to the Haudenosaunee in terms of needing to have the hill early to compete late. I didn't say that when we were on the Haudenosaunee, but the Haudenosaunee, in order to have any chance late game, they're gonna have to take it early. Like, they're gonna have to,
Which they can do. Like, they
Yes.
can definitely do that, even without an explorer that contests early. I think that they just have a very good rush.
yeah. And the Lakota Explorer is just like the best explorer in the game. And so, like, they can compete over the hill early. They're the quintessential, outside of maybe the Inca, the quintessential punish greedy strats civ. They're not that map dependent.
You know
Because-
do you know who's the Lakota expert in our group? That would be Solo Dolo.
Solo Dolo Man, but I don't think he's in the chat here because we would like his opinion if he was there. But like, we've seen him be very, very effective early on in the game. Should he want to push early with the Lakota, then they can just back off because obviously they're like, who are we saying? They were like the Germans in terms of you don't want to be losing your army because your army is extremely valuable and your economy is not very strong. Your economy is safe, but it's not strong.
German economy is strong, to be fair, compared to the Sioux especially.
Yeah, but
I would also caution, too, that they are a very cav-heavy civ, and their infantry is very lacking. Like, the clubmen are not impressive, and the Wakina rifles, they're decent.
I think Wakina rifles are the best Aboriginal rifle
Skirm.
unit.
Sure, but I still don't find that they go toe-to-toe very well with other skirms.
I think
Like,
the fact that you can spam them a lot more effectively, because you can send, 24 in age 4
Yeah.
from a card.
something
Like, you
like
can
that.
throw a whole bunch of Wakina rifles out.
Their strength is very much in their cav, and I
Yes.
think they were designed that way.
Also, apparently, like, people are starting to realize that you can do a 99 villager boom very quickly with the Lakota too, if you really want to invest in that. which will allow you to either pump out dog soldiers or pump out a lot of troops late game for the purposes of having that late game push. I don't think that the Lakota have a very strong late game push, like compared to other civs on this list, but I think that they're still pretty solid. As I said, I wasn't able to really finish saying due to the fact that they can send hunts from their home city, they always are safe. Like,
I think they're weak to heavy infantry civs, especially because they don't have heavy cannon or any sort of cannons.
To heavy infantry, but you can kite them. That's the problem. And heavy
What
infantry
are you going to kite them with?
With skirmishers.
But their skirmishers are not all that potent.
They are. Though. You can have them. You put them with teepees, and they're going to be solid.
Yeah, but a civ goes cannons or like longbows with like Royal Guard musks or something.
True.
Or just
true. I mean, I'm by no means saying that the Lakota are like broken or strong. Like, yes, they have.
The Lakota are not gonna keep up because they're not gonna have the eco. Like, they might win one fight, but then that's it.
It's one of those situations. But this is why I'm saying they're gonna need to take the hill early, because by the time you get to the late game, they're going to be falling behind, and they're gonna need to have that opportune moment to push on and take the hill. So I have the Lakota. I probably have them higher than the Haudenosaunee, but I have them at B tier. What do you guys think? Happy, sad, angry?
I put them at C tier personally.
What do you say, Tristan?
Well, let Zane finish his thought.
Oh, sorry, Zane. Sorry, I didn't.
Just because I really think that the lack of economy hurts them, and I don't think that they're playing like a military, like their military is their eco, or like that is their civ. Like, I would say that they're almost nomadic. Like I mean, obviously they are nomadic, but that's kind of the point.
Yeah.
And once their army dies, and I don't think it's strong enough to fight everyone, right? I think that it's a war of attrition that they just can't win.
Yeah. I mean, I can definitely see that. I think that, however, if you want to go into soldier heavy builds later in the game, dog soldiers are extremely potent.
Yeah, I think if we're going to decide whether they're B or C tier, I think we need to make a comparison to the Haudenosaunee and the Aztecs.
And I think that they're better
at that point, that will help us make a decision. And I think if we compare them to the Haudenosaunee, I think that there's a certain amount of contrast in their strengths and weaknesses, but I think they struggle a little bit on the economic side. I think they play very similar
in terms of what their goals are in the game. However, I think that the Lakota are able to punish people more effectively when with the ability to raid. Like, the Haudenosaunee want to fight over the hill. The Lakota don't have to fight over the hill to be effective.
Yes, and I think it depends on how the game plays out too. I think that the Lakota obviously have a better cav strategy, and I think that the Haudenosaunee have a better meat shield and infantry strategy.
What we didn't actually talk about enough was the fact that they're kind of like Chimus, where it's like their raiding potential is off the charts. Especially if you have the Explorer grouped in with them, because the Explorer increases the movement speed of all the cav units. So
exactly.
I think where he put them in B, I think that's probably fair.
Yeah, they're probably worse than the Germans, better than the Haudenosaunee.
I think that's probably fair.
I agree. Yeah, I agree.
Okay, let's move on to, because we've got about... We've been speeding up, but we've got about 35 minutes before we have to...
Yeah, we got lots of time. Don't feel the need to rush.
No, I know, because we can review after we get everybody on the list, but we want to make sure we get everybody on the list within the next 30 minutes or so. So, next up is the Ottomans. Beastbita will be happy to know that the Ottomans, I don't think, are the worst civ in the game.
I have some thoughts on Ottomans. They've been growing on me lately.
Yes.
So the Ottomans... on paper, they're a weak civ because they get vills slower. They don't have... Well, they do have skirm units, but it's not the obvious unit. It would be Avis guns, and they are really expensive. Their units are expensive, and it seems that they don't have the economy to back it up. But if you... So you have two options as Ottomans, because they have one of the they're one of those civs that can have a really strong early game pressure. But I would argue that's not Ottoman's best strat. Their best strat is when you rush to age 3, send the town center wagon and make 2 town centers so that you have 4 town centers pumping out free villagers, and then you just invest in Abbas guns and Mamluks and Spahis, because there is an age up option that lets you train Mamluks. So basically, you have these unkillable, overpowered units backed up by one of the strongest economies in the game. If you get 4 TCs pumping out free villagers. So while Otto has been known to be one of the worst eco civs, I would argue that there is a way to play them in which they are the most boomy civ, or one of the most boomy
Yes.
civs.
However, within the meta for the tournament, that can be easily punished.
That's true.
And because of that, I don't think that the Ottomans are going to be able to pull that off a lot of the time. And so for that reason, while it's a strong strategy and when we're playing, I don't think, especially if that's sussed out, like if people are scouting, which they will, that's not viable. However, I will say the Ottomans, like you sort of already said, Janissaries aren't scary. Like, you know, if you were doing a 1v1, the Ottoman eco is poor unless you're doing what you're suggesting in terms of your strategy. The revolts are super awkward, but like if they're able to pull off the Spahi Abizgun combo, like that's scary with the Mamluks thrown in there. Like it's just a mess to deal with.
It is an example of where you have to commit to one or the other strategy.
Yes.
And either one has its shortcomings, right? You don't win the game early, or you don't have time to get to the late game to, you know, because you went boomy, and you get punished for it by not being able to win the game because of it.
Exactly. So I have them at C tier. I think they're above the Aztecs, but I think that I would prefer to be playing the Haudenosaunee, to be honest with you.
I think that the Haudenosaunee are less pigeonholed. They have a little bit more flexibility. They have more defined strengths, and I feel like the Ottomans, you know what you're getting, and they're very limited in their options if you really want to be successful.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't disagree. That's a decent position for Ottomans.
I think that they would probably be the top tier C tier civ.
C plus, absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Next up is the Portuguese. I think that Tristan should probably start with the Portuguese.
I have done a lot of very greedy strats with them. I've really experimented with the Brazil revolt, and
it's fun.
The problem, like I've actually found that it's more successful to do that revolt if you don't rush to it, and then if you actually just play the game normally and you contest early and you try to get on the point. I think that, like, I'll kind of start, I guess, from the top down. In that Brazil revolt, it essentially is what I think the Russians should be able to do to be successful. Like, if the Russians in theory were going to be successful, their success would be in repeatedly throwing masses of troops, of like slightly inferior or greatly inferior troops, and just overwhelming the enemy by the fact that they just keep coming and they never stop coming.
And they don't stop coming.
So
they don't stop coming.
With the Brazil revolt, every TC spawns something like 5 or 10 of their revolutionary units that are like half strength. They're very weak. They're basically cannon fodder. But if you have, say, 5 or 6 TCs, all of a sudden you're sending in like 30 units every 2 minutes. And then you combine those with excellent dragoons that can also, you can send a card to turn them into, like, they give them a hand attack. So they're very versatile in that regard. They're very powerful. The Portuguese are already known for having very good dragoons. I think Caçadores, other than being fragile, are some of the best skirmishers in the game. They're just expensive. And I know that their early musk rush can be quite strong as well. Like, I don't know what the timing is, but I know that you can get
it's about
30
8
or 40
minutes.
musks.
It's about 40 musks at 8 to 9 minutes.
Yeah. So like 8 to 9 minutes, you've got 40 musks. That's pretty hard to beat unless you've got a mass of skirmishers.
So I agree with that.
Also, like 8 skirmishers to like kite them to death.
Yeah.
Right. I do actually want to share my thoughts on Portugal, unless you wanted to go.
No, go ahead, Zane. Go ahead.
So what I think of as Portugal is they're like Dutch in the sense that they're they don't really want us to be an age two. They want to age up and they want their eco to start popping off. Granted, they so let's start with their TCs, right? Their map control with their free TCs means that they're harder to be raided because they can place TCs everywhere and protect their hunts. The second thing is they have really strong goons, which means that they're able to repel raids long enough to get active. And then what I would say though is that they have really strong goon units, but they're lacking in strong. They're lacking in falconets. What else?
Well, the Orkan guns are very good at shredding infantry.
Yeah, but they're so weak. Like Culverins one-shot them, right? And they have less. Do they have the same range as Falks?
I think that it might be less than Falks.
Right.
Might be. I'm not
better
sure.
against infantry.
But what I will say, the Portuguese are really strong late. Like, I do not want to mess with a late game Portuguese army unless I'm maybe the Inca.
But they're also one of the civs that are map dependent, right?
Yes, heavily map dependent.
Heavily map dependent. Their resources run out, and I found that sometimes the resources will run out before I can even get max pop. That's how bad it is.
Yeah, and also they're a civ that's going to have to invest a lot of resources to take the hill. Because as you said, you get you do the Musk Rush, and that's a heavy investment. You want to do late game pushes. It's a heavy investment to get Caçadores and Jeanette Dragoons. Like, it's just going to be a heavy investment to be able to get the hill.
The guard upgrade is free if you revolt.
Sure, but still, it's gonna hurt to be doing that if you're the Portuguese. So for that reason, I have them probably low B tier, high C tier.
I'd put them between Germany and Lakota.
You put them between Germany and Lakota? Okay.
Because I think they, for example, counter Lakota with their goons. They're just more, and then
yeah.
And then I think they're better than Iroquois, just from what they can do eco-wise. So
yeah,
I think that the Haudenosaunee have more win conditions, but I think that I think that Haudenosaunee, I would take the Haudenosaunee over the Portuguese, but I take the Portuguese over the Lakota. It's one of those situations.
Well, they're all solidly at the lower end of B tier.
Yeah,
low to B tier.
Do we have anything else to say, or can we move on to Russia?
I think we can move on.
All right. So Russia. What are you guys' thoughts on Russia?
I don't have too many thoughts on Russia.
Okay, actually, I've probably played the most, so I should probably start with Russia. How I sort of look at Russia is they have potential, has more potential than we originally thought, because we had them at down with the Aztecs.
I think they were really low. They were D tier.
In fact, we might have had them lower than the Aztecs. You're right. I think that we had them as our worst civ. I think that they're better than we originally thought, especially with the ability to raid, because Cossacks are their upside.
They also have cav that are specifically meant for raiding, specifically meant for it.
Exactly. They can control the map fairly effectively late, because the Pricknicks can they might be able to actually punish the Dutch in the late game. They might be able to punish the Japanese in the late game. Like, the Russians have the ability to punish those building centric late game economies, because you don't need a lot of our Pricknicks to take those buildings down. Also, the fact that they can kill villagers very effectively, they have the ability to be a force in the late game. Their musketeers become serviceable by the time you get to the late game with heavy cannons. That is sort of their win condition. Cav archers are surprisingly decent, and Cossacks are Cossacks. And if you get upgrades for Cossacks are a decent heavy cavalry unit. So I don't think that they're terrible, but I think that they're outclassed in the early game by civs that are stronger in the early game. I think that they're outclassed in late by civs that are stronger than them in the late game. I think that they're generally just weaker than civs like the French. I think they're just generally weaker than civs like the some of the B tier civs. And in comparison to civs like the Haudenosaunee and the like, I probably would have them lower than the Haudenosaunee, but maybe high C tier. Like, that's sort of where I'm thinking. What do you think, Tristan?
I think that's honestly a pretty fair assessment, because everything I've tried with them that was infantry centric, their infantry are just so weak. Even converting their strells to muskets, that requires good timing, and their muskets still really are not that great. It's like, okay, great, you've got 70 muskets. Well, they're about equivalent to 30 of another civ's muskets. Like,
that is just... until you get to guard status.
Yeah, but by that point, people have a bunch of artillery, or they got good skirmishers, or they have better muskets, like redcoats.
Yeah, but like at that point, you pretty much are using your muskets to defend your heavy cannons in the late game. You're not using them to, like, you're using them as anti-cav, pretty much.
So if we're talking about the Musk heavy cannon strat, I would argue that Brits does the same thing but better.
Sure. But I think that what the Russians can do that the British can't is the ability to punish people in the late game economically.
Russia can do that?
They're among the best raiding civs in general.
Because of Pricknicks.
Yeah, and even like Cossacks. You can get Cossacks pretty easily, and I think they come in more numbers than Hussars usually do.
Yes. So, like, the Russians' value is in their ability to raid other people. And that's why I think that they're stronger now than they were when we did our previous tier list, because they have that late game value. They can potentially punish the Dutch. They can potentially punish the Japanese and the Inca late game, because while everybody's trying to focus on the hill, they can be throwing a couple of Pricknicks at your resource buildings, which are extremely expensive to replace in the late game.
And quite fragile, too.
Yes. And they can go for people's factories and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so for that reason, I think that the Russians are probably, like, I'd put them at low B tier, high C tier.
I'd put them at high C tier. I think that they're okay, but they're not tournament win worthy. I'd be surprised if we saw a single Russian win in the tourney.
Sure. Would you put them above or below the Ottomans?
Probably above Ottomans.
Okay, we'll put them at high C tier. Sorry, B-Spita. Okay, last two civs. We've got the Spanish and then the Swedes. So Spanish up first.
Fun.
Yeah, you start with that, Zane, because you're the Spanish.
One of my favorite civs. So let's start with the fact that they're age 1. Nothing special about their age 1, but the moment they hit age 2, they got the war dogs. War dogs are very capable units, very cheap. They can beat musks 1-on-1, especially if the opponent's not microing properly. So they're one of those civs that can get the easy, free first minute or two on the hill.
Yeah.
And then, honestly, they can fight in age 2, but that's not what they want to do. What they want to do is they want to age up to age 3. They want to get Spanish gold, and they want to start pumping out their unique units, which are very unique in how they play, right?
Yeah.
Rods and Lancers are like units with like, they're not all around units, but they're specific units that if you micro them well, they're extremely efficient. And then what they have really good revolt options too. And then there's the strat of the crossbow pike. The devs literally had to nerf the Spanish fast industrial because it was too powerful. Like Aussie Dronger made a video about this, that they nerfed Spain because their fast industrial with archaic units was extremely powerful, because they were able to get up there so fast. They were able to like have Spanish gold shipments, like able to get 400 gold with every shipment. And then Unction. I've been playing around with Unction, and that increases the efficiency of your army extensively, as well as keeping them healed constantly, right? They have so many options, I'd say. Like they're almost they're almost as versatile as France because they have every unit composition and more and some.
I gotta step away for a minute. I'll be right back.
Yep.
No worries. And honestly, I put them above France in every tier list personally because
they have more upside than the French in certain areas.
Like how we say France is jack of all trades, master of none. I would say Spain is the master of some things like age 3, or age like the fast industrial like crossbow pike. They're the master of that.
I mean, the tercios are the only time where it's like, oh, we actually are afraid of pikemen.
Yes, exactly. And then they're age 3 with Spanish gold, like, and the fact that rods are like hard to counter with like skirm, because a lot of players like Germany doesn't have musk units, so how are they going to counter rods? So like they have a special unit composition that counters more civs than most other civs have counters to most civs, kind of thing.
Yeah. And the fact that rods can also be a raiding type unit helps.
Yeah.
So
they're one of the only units, like they're one of the best Chimu counters because they're fast.
Yes. Chimus can still escape them though, sadly.
It's true, but yeah.
And I think that the Spanish are probably a decent counter into the Inca. But I would put them at high A tier. Would you put them above? I think
above France, but maybe below Japan.
I think I'm sort of on board with that. Putting them above France, below Japan.
Yeah, that's fine.
Yeah. Last but not least, the Swedes, and once again, as the resident Swede lover, we'll have you start that off.
I mean, Swedes, I would say, are broken in this game mode. I would say that the dominant strat in 1v1 games is you keep Swedes from benefiting from their full torp boom, but it's harder to do that in King of the Hill. And once they get their full torp boom going, if they're really good at it, they'll have hunts dead next to every single torp. They'll have the full torp boom, and they'll be able to be spamming Carolean. So like they're able to get out of units quicker than Dutch, China, about the same time as Brits, right?
Yep.
So I would say they're like Brits, but they're less map dependent, right?
Yeah.
They're less.
They're a little bit more pigeonholed, but I think they have more upside than the Brits throughout the game.
Mm-hmm. They have. Oh man, I mean, like, I think fully upgraded Caroleans, they're better than Redcoats because they have range resist card, right? And then they have the infinite 6 Mamluks card, which is just totally broken. And that's not even counting, like, you could go American Revolution Revolt, which is really strong, but recently I haven't even been doing that because their torp boom will last the whole game. Like, if you send blackberries, they won't even go through the first round of blackberries, and you have 2 blackberry shipments.
Yeah.
Like, you're never gonna run out of resources as Swedes. It's never gonna happen.
And that's sort of how I felt with the Swedes as I'm playing them. Like, I have no idea what I'm doing, and I still dominate with them when I play them. And so, like, the Swedes I found it's just like there's nothing you can really do. Like, if you know what you're gonna get from the Swedes because they're gonna be getting a bunch of Caroleans, and you can't really hard counter Caroleans with skirmishers because if they catch you out, you're screwed. And they're gonna just like Carolean it's like they're gonna either Carolean charge or like Carolean cannon.
You can't really play chicken with Caroleans either.
That's the point. Is usually that idea of kiting with skirmishers it doesn't work because you're gonna get caught and it's gonna hurt.
And then they also have probably the best mercenary options in the game, which I haven't even explored that much. But
yes.
They have more cards than anyone. Even the Germans with their mercenary card, the Swedes have that, and they have an age-up option that they can train it from their stables and barracks. They can train Jaegers and Black Riders. It's ridiculous. Yeah.
So for that reason, I don't because the lack of versatility. Because I don't think that the Swedes are that versatile, but they don't need to be.
They don't need to be. They're strong enough. They don't need any.
It's pretty much just like Caroleans are so versatile of a unit that they count as the versatility for the Civ.
to be fair, they kind of have to, because there really isn't any other unit that they can get as a mainline infantry unit. Like,
Yeah.
other than going and getting the Jaegers at the.
With crossbows, I would argue that they do have the anti-infantry. Like, just mix a couple crossbows in with the Caroleans, then suddenly you're toe to toe with musks, no problem. Before Carolean upgrades.
Yeah. Because then Caroleans get pretty strong in the late game. But like, I remember the one game. In fact, it's the opening video for the opening scene for the hype video for the tournament. We've got literally just me playing as the Swedes. I didn't touch the hill early whatsoever. Like, I just showed up late and then took the hill, and nobody was able to take me off the hill. Like, I just sat and was like, oh, you guys are going to fight me? Well, let's just duke this out. And I eventually won.
I would argue Sweden is the reason that we have a rule of 1 civ per week, because I believe that we would see an inordinate amount of Swedish players if they would choose that civ all the time if they could.
Sure. So would you put them at S or would you put them at A?
Certainly at S. I mean, like, honestly, and they're not even my favorite civ, so it's not so much out of bias. I would
Not
put
even
them
your
at the
favorite
very
civ.
top of the list.
I don't know if I'd put them at the very top of the
plus.
list. I don't think that they're perfect. And like, they don't have tons of paths to victory. They're just really strong by their nature. But like, if you've only got one strategy that works really well, I don't see
We're
it.
talking about a civ that is still broken.
Yes. I think I put them above the Inca, but below the Indians. Because I think that
Like,
the Indians
we
are
talked
just
about the Indians
so
being a
strong.
quintessential
India,
King of the Hill civ.
Swedes.
Pardon?
I would beat India every time as Swedes.
I
Yeah,
don't
not
think
a
that that's the
1v1, is it?
case. I really don't. The reason why I say that is because the Indians don't sacrifice a lot by getting a lot of early time on the hill, and they have a very, very, very strong late game with a lot of versatility, balance, and they have the options that can counter the Swedish late game, just like Caroleans and cannons with some like
can the
Jaegers and such.
Swedes adapt to any situation that the game presents? Because I think that the
Fairly
Indians
easily.
have options for
I
basically
think
anything.
so, yes. I think the Swedes can adapt to any situation without a problem. They like, if it's an earlier game, then they, instead of going full torp, they only go like, they make 8 less torps and they pour into military and they'll do just fine.
I don't know. The thing is, you give the Indians Gurkhas behind walls right next to the Agra fort. I'm not gonna take the Caroleans anywhere close to that.
Yeah, but then you forget about leather cannons.
Sure, leather
Yeah,
cannons.
but leather cannons are going to lose to howdahs, and howdahs are really easy to produce. And
No, but
these-
if we're talking early game,
Caroleans will wreck Haldus.
yeah. If we're talking early game, I mean, like, you're gonna have to still fight underneath an Agra fort. Like, that's just how it's gonna have to be. Long story short, I still think that, I mean, the Swedes are probably... I'll gladly put them above the Inca, even though I think that the Inca can give them a run for their money, quite effectively, give them a run for their money. But I will put the Swedes above the Inca, but I still think that India is the best civ.
Yeah, I have to agree. And
I mean,
don't know,
obviously,
like,
the 3 top civs are hands down the Indians, the Swedes, and the Inca. Everybody else is like those are the 3 civs. If you're not playing those civs, like if those are not your like I'm going to win this game civs, then what are we doing here? And then everybody else is like, oh, okay, I've just played the Inca, I've just played the Swedes, I've just played the Indians. Now time for me to, like pull out the A tier civs. Stuff like that.
I could see like a pro player or somebody that's really good, like that really knows the civ inside and out, piloting a C tier or a low B tier civ to victory, maybe even multiple times in the tournament. Like if they have a pet civ that they're just really good at, I think the player skill obviously can make a big difference. But I think if we're talking about like an average player that's good at the game, that knows how to play King of the Hill, I would say that this tier list would be valuable to follow.
I mean, this is for the tournament. Those that are going to be participating in the tournament, this is what to expect. This is sort of our perspective on where certain civs are at. and why we think that these civs are better, certain civs are worse, in the tournament player's hands, whether they're in a good player's hands or a bad player's hands. Just like if they're played to what we consider to be their fullest potential, this is where they're sitting at.
Yes, I agree.
All right. If that's the case, do you guys have anything else to say about the tier list? Any thoughts, concerns?
I will say that I agree with where you placed the Spanish. I didn't have much input that I was able to provide because I'd step away, but I think that they're really good. Spanish gold makes them even better. Like, I think that they're pretty well-rounded.
Yeah.
And I think like we basically have agreed, I guess, on where everything is. It just looked weird to see the Ottomans so low.
Away, by far, miles above any other civ, but I'll relent for your guys' tier list.
You like the Swedes a lot, more than you're letting on right now.
I like them. Well, I know they're good. That's why I'm vouching for them right now. I know that they're like broken good. But that's all. I'm cool with them being placed where they are on this tier list.
Yeah. All right. Well, if that's the case, thus concludes the tier list. This is going to go on YouTube.